Professor Dave is a wildly popular and successful YouTuber who does a lot of videos intended to educate people on various subjects, and he also dabbles in skepticism quite a lot. He recently released a multi-part series on responding to creationist arguments, and of course, the creationists caught wind of this, so we're going to meet a couple of them, Fred and Doug. Fred and Doug have problems with some of the things Professor Dave said, so let's see what they have to say.
He currently has a video series that will culminate in 5 parts, and they're titled The Definitive Guide to Debunking Creationists. Now, Doug, because of the popularity of his YouTube channel, he has like over 3 million subscribers. He has elicited responses from prominent creation and intelligent design scientists, including several at the Discovery Institute and also Dr. James Tour, who we interviewed early this year.
Okay, I have a minor correction for Fred and Doug here. They said creation and intelligent design scientists, when I think what they meant to say is bullshit artists.
But it is only fair that our audience know his actual background. His real name is David James Farina. And even though he's named after both an apostle of Jesus Christ and the King of Israel, he calls himself an atheist.
Well, it's all over for Professor Dave now. We've found out he has a name. He's tried to hide this from us for a long time, but he is, of course, named after things. And notice, they kind of question whether he is an atheist or not by saying he calls himself an atheist. No, my guys, Professor Dave is an atheist. We exist. We are out there.
According to the Discovery Institute, David James is neither a professor nor a PhD, but just a failed ex-teacher who tried unsuccessfully to get a master's degree in chemistry. And Fred, while his academic failures that doesn't necessarily disqualify him from speaking on science.
So they're about to do this a whole lot in this video. They're about to attack Professor Dave's qualifications repeatedly. But notice how he pulls it back at the end there. He says, well, Professor Dave is nothing but a failed chemist. He had to do something easier. But he pulls back just a little bit and he says, but that doesn't mean he can't teach. That doesn't mean he can't educate. That doesn't mean he doesn't know things. And the reason they have to make that concession is because if they discounted Professor Dave on account of his education alone, they would have to do it for themselves as well. Fred, as it turns out, he has a bachelor's of electrical engineering. He's an engineer. It's always the engineers. Salem hypothesis strikes again, baby. And Doug, it seems, doesn't have a degree of any kind, or at least if he does, he doesn't talk about it publicly. Everything I can find out about him is just about the churches he's worked for, the pro-life groups he's worked with. That's pretty much it.
He did have to settle for a Master of Arts in Science Education, which I would think would preclude a decent person from using the moniker professor.
Out of the 4 of us, me, Doug, Fred, and Professor Dave, the fact that Dave has a master's degree makes him the most qualified out of all of us. What a shame for him. By the way, this is YouTube. You can call yourself anything you want on YouTube. There are people with much worse monikers, I assure you. It's just a name, my guy. You're overthinking it. He calls himself professor because he teaches. That's it.
His arts degree has helped him in delivering what I'm told are decent quality videos, especially in areas outside of chemistry and evolution. I hear some of them are pretty good, but after suffering through his debate with James Tour, all the way through, from James Tour's gentlemanly-like introduction and his gentlemanly-like postscript.
I just want you to notice that in that image they used of the debate, it just has Professor Dave talking, and it has James Tour looking like he's about to strangle somebody in anger, which he yells all the way throughout that video. Dave, of course, doesn't let off the gas and really gives it to him. But let's not act like James Tour was a saintly figure in this debate. You can watch the debate for yourself and see what I'm talking about. James Tour yells over Professor Dave very frequently and makes the whole thing a very unpleasant mess. He is very nice at the beginning, but that doesn't really count for a whole lot.
Right on through to David James's profanity at the end.
Oh no, did Professor Dave say a no-no word? Seriously, grow up, my guy. You are not a child who has to go, every time somebody says the F word or whatever he said during that debate. I don't remember what he said during that debate, but it doesn't matter. Grow up.
After suffering through that, and then I did hear him embarrass himself discussing plasma astronomy. And I've just not watched any of his other stuff.
Oh, my guy, I suspect, if I had to guess, Professor Dave isn't the only person you haven't listened to about actual science.
And I'm only condescending to it now, Fred, at the behest of our listeners. They reminded us that even a pretender like Dave should hear the truth in hopes that even a guy like him might eventually believe the gospel and avoid an eternity of conscious torment.
I think being trapped with you forever would be that scenario playing out. I don't think saying something like, well, see, if you don't believe what I believe, you'll be separated from me for all of eternity, is quite the threat you think it is.
So, Doug, while this guy isn't a nice guy we're dealing with, he doesn't have a lot of class. He's not a guy of high character. You hate having to say that about someone, but again, all you have to do is watch his debates with people who oppose him.
Boss Hogg has a point. It turns out people who disagree with me are always bad people. People who don't agree with everything I say are, by default, nasty, untrustworthy, garish monsters. Seriously, dude, who thinks this way about other people? You may not like Dave's style, you may think he's disrespectful, but to judge him as a person based on those snippets alone is frankly ridiculous.
So right there, he's putting in something that, Doug, we fight against the flat Earth idea, and unfortunately, there's plenty of Christians who have fallen for that. There's both Christians and evolutionists. In fact, I know for many years the president of the Flat Earth Society is an evolutionist.
I did a rudimentary search, and I could not find any information about this so-called evolutionist that led the Flat Earth Society. What I did find out is the person who led it for 50 years was in fact a young Earth creationist who said the idea of a round Earth was invented to drive people away from the Bible. So a lot in common with these guys, as much as they don't like to admit it. Their whole argument is that we shouldn't be next to this clearly unscientific worldview of a flat Earth. But yes, you should. They are just a little bit more literal about the Bible than you are. That's the whole point. They are Bible literalists just like you are, but they take it a little bit further than you do. That's the main difference there.
He lists deistic evolution and theistic evolution as more scientific than intelligent design?
Let's clear the air of your confusion and add some new confusion to it, because intelligent design is not science. It's in fact completely unscientific. That's the point. Evolution is a scientific fact. The fact that theistic evolutionists and deistic evolutionists accept evolution is real automatically puts them ahead of intelligent design, which is, again, not science.
Yeah, he does.
Huh.
Yeah,
I wonder what that's all about, because theistic evolution and deistic evolution, by definition, they would involve a supernatural creator.
Let me clear this one up for you as well, I guess. Professor Dave is not saying anything about the existence of God in this chart. He is merely stating which ideas, including God, come the closest to what we know of observable reality.
But they appeal to the secular science. They buy in with almost all of the secular science.
Fun fact, there is no such thing as secular science and non-secular science. There is only science and pseudoscience. You and your set fall on the side of pseudoscience.
Well, that just strikes me as incongruous that he would not list intelligent design, which does not... Well, I guess this intelligent design does require a creator.
You gotta appreciate those little moments of lucidity where somebody's about to make an argument they know isn't true. In this case, he was about to argue that intelligent design doesn't include a god when it clearly does. Intelligent design, if you didn't know, is just a relabel of the term creation science. The people responsible for creation science, which is an explicitly Christian idea, are the same people who became the scions of the intelligent design movement. And that's a big problem, and that's a big problem because they are denying science and trying to replace science with God, which is what makes them unscientific. It's not that they believe in God, therefore they're bad. There are plenty of scientists who accept evolution and also believe in God. The problem is when you try to make the concept of God supersede evolution and deny that evolution exists in the first place.
Although it could be aliens.
Turtles all the way down, baby.
We're now showing a chart of what we believe is the types of creation science, and we believe this is the accurate representation of what he should show. And so
That's right.
The most scientific we've got listed is 1A, Young Earth Creation.
Okay, well then you should be able to show me all of the research papers that young Earth creationists have put out. What's that? There are none? There are none that have been accepted for peer review? How shocking. I don't know if you know this, but science isn't just a field where you just declare something and then it's just reality. No, science is a process, and creationists do not take part in this process because their ideas do not hold up to scrutiny since they are fundamentally religious and not scientific.
And then 1B, I put intelligent design, and that's provided that they don't delve into geology and go too far with any lip service towards common descent.
Ah yes, how silly of us. Intelligent design can be the most scientific of all, provided it's not accepting science?
After that is gap creationism. Now we're heading down towards least scientific. After that is progressive creationism, and that's the Hugh Ross thing, the days are millions of years, and the day age creation where, each day is millions of years, and then they believe in some form of evolution. And then, of course, theistic evolution is a complete capitulation to the secular world, secular evolutionists.
I guess the one good thing we can say about the intelligent design people is they do occasionally try to submit papers, which then, of course, get ripped apart by actual scientists doing actual science on the topics they're talking about. Creationists, on the other hand, don't even attempt to do that much. They just open shitty museums.
Which is refuted by a number of scriptures. I know we don't have time to list the Bible verses, but...
Ah yes, Bible verses. How scientific.
It's not only unscientific, more offensive to me is it's unbiblical.
Yeah, exactly.
Theistic evolution.
This clearly shows you their priorities. Their priority is not anything to do with science or the scientific process. In fact, I would say neither one of these guys know much about that in the first place, or else they wouldn't be saying the things they're saying. They are clearly all about the Bible and defending the Bible. That's their number one thing. Everything has to follow from that.
They'll always admit to some problems, Doug. They're like, well, science advances, and, we correct things as we go because we're so honorable, this and that.
Creationists always view it as something of a weakness when people change their minds about things as new information comes in. But that is not a weakness, that is a strength. Scientists aren't saying that they're changing their minds about things as new information comes in because they're so much more honorable than you are, although that is probably the case. What they're saying is, as new information comes in, we must modify our earlier ideas to fit this new information. And there's nothing wrong with that. Evolution has been modified extensively by new discoveries since the time of Charles Darwin, and yet it has withstood the test of time very well. For an idea like that to make it nearly 200 years of constantly taking in new information, it has to be a damn good idea.
The problem here, Doug, is science actually falsifies their position.
I don't really understand what the argument is he's trying to make, and I don't think he understands either, but let's try to make some sense of it anyway. Falsification is an essential part of the scientific process. When you put an idea forward, you must have some criteria on which it can be tested that if it fails, you go back to the drawing board. For an idea to survive 200 years of questions and challenges, it must be a really good idea. The fact that evolution has been able to take in so much new information and integrate it successfully means it's a good idea. It works. It's observable reality in this particular case. This is how science works. Science is never going to have every last aspect of anything perfect. That's not the point of science. Science is a process of continual change. That's the whole purpose. By saying you have an idea that never changes, you are essentially admitting openly that you are not following the scientific method.
Professor Dave, he'll present evolution like this piece of Swiss cheese I'm showing right now in the video. Okay. It's this clump of Swiss cheese. It has a couple of divots in it, but no holes in it. It's like a really healthy looking piece of Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
So But in reality, Doug, this is what evolution really looks like. And now I'm showing, Swiss cheese with a lot of holes that you can see, right, Doug?
So this is the part of the presentation where they resort to memes because they don't have data, they don't have evidence, they don't have studies. All they have is pictures of cheese.
I'm hoping that his audience that tunes in to watch this show will have at least somewhat of an open mind and ask themselves, are they being brainwashed by the pseudoscience that Professor Dave is pushing?
If Professor Dave's audience watches this video, the only conclusion they're going to come to is, these guys are morons. I hate to tell you, fellas, but you're not exactly making a great case for the points you are trying to make.
Young Earth creationists in particular tend to picture a kablooey graphic with fully formed planets and comets tumbling out, which indeed would be preposterous.
Preposterous, he says. Preposterous. So that's obvious straw man, Fred. I've never met a creationist who claims that's what the secular Big Bang teaches. That's a caricature.
Really? Because when I was a teenager, I was homeschooled using Christian homeschool materials from a Young Earth creationist group out of Florida, and they had pretty much that exact same graphic with that exact same argument. So you say it doesn't exist, I say I've seen it with my own two eyes. I read the material. I know for a fact that that is exactly the kind of thing they say about the Big Bang.
Now, we do believe that God created everything in 6 days. But he's conflating that into us somehow misrepresenting what they believe about the Big Bang. It's just completely disingenuous.
No, I say you're the one being disingenuous here because I've seen it myself. I've seen it with my own two eyes. There's no way you've been in the creationist movement this long and have never seen or heard of people making this argument.
Doug, I'm not aware of any creationist saying that Venus's retrograde orbit, where it rotates the opposite direction of the other planets, is a problem because of an explosion, a Big Bang. That's not what we claim. No, it instead comes from their very own nebular hypothesis for the origin of our solar system that Jonathan Sarfati for Creation Ministries International tongue-in-cheek calls it the nebulous hypothesis.
Wouldn't it be weird if we could and have witnessed stellar evolution and the evolution of new solar systems from nebulas? Wouldn't that be odd if we've actually done that and have data and information that says that is literally true? You can observe it at every part of the process. You can see new solar systems being formed. That is a fact.
This low-grade hypothesis posits a nebula spiraling inwards, which due to the conservation of angular momentum should result in all the planets that are formed out of this fantasy to rotate in the same direction. It's called prograde. But Venus rotates the opposite direction. And evolutionists even admit that this is a problem. And so they think Venus originally was prograde and then something knocked it off course. So they concoct stories.
If you will notice, they always conflate the idea of biological evolution with other ideas that have nothing to do with it whatsoever. Biological evolution is a process that happens to life forms. It is not anything to do with the evolution of stars and planets from nebulas. And he calls it a low-grade hypothesis that planets and stars emerge from nebulas and gas and dust. It is not. It is, again, observable. We have seen it happening, and Professor Dave, in his video, includes examples of that very process. Their only argument, as Professor Dave would say, is to just go, nuh-uh.
And we just happen to point out, why is Venus spinning backwards? God's got a sense of humor. And then they have to try to explain it, and then they come up with just those stories to try to get around it.
The irony here is so thick, so heavy, isn't it? Scientists have to invent stories. Our story, as principled creation scientists, is to say, well, Jesus has a sense of humor. How scientific.
And then next, Fred, David James makes a rhetorical claim that I found amazing. And it speaks to your quip that the left exists in a seemingly constant state of hypocrisy.
What any of this has to do with politics and left and right, I have no idea. But this certainly has to be some kind of a dog whistle to his base. You don't have to be a hardcore left-wing radical to accept that science exists and is a real thing.
Astronomy is perhaps the most observational branch of science, as we can simply look through telescopes and see what's going on in the universe. We can see protoplanetary disks. We can observe star formation in various stages within nebulae. We have a profound understanding of stellar dynamics and where the elements come from. We use spectroscopy to analyze the composition of stars and to see which molecules are capable of forming in the vacuum of space. Encourage them to visit their local observatory and make their own observations, and to ask questions that the employees will be thrilled to answer. Most will refuse, which says a lot about the willful nature of their ignorance, which you may point out to them.
See, I have no idea what any of that has to do with politics. All Professor Dave is saying that a lot of these creationists you encounter are deliberately, willfully ignorant of the facts, and you should encourage them to go to actual scientific institutions and ask questions. I can say, for one, my whole family has been to the Creation Museum. Have they been to, let's say, an actual observatory to ask questions about these things? No, they just go to their propagandistic outlets like you people, Fred and Doug, and call it a day. That's what Professor Dave is saying. Professor Dave is saying, hey, venture out into the world and actually talk to people.
So, Doug, I'm pretty sure that it's the secular astronomers. They're the ones who are not going to want us to ask the tough questions, because the first thing we point out is that huge elephant in the room, that big hole in the Swiss cheese he doesn't want his audience to know about. And that's the fact that the James Webb Telescope is finding these fully formed galaxies where they aren't supposed to be, way back, early towards the Big Bang.
Once more, they conflate different scientific fields as if it's all one big thing. The reason why they have to do this is because science is complicated, and they want to make it seem a lot more simple, that science is just one overarching idea determined to do away with God. There's no reason to expect an astronomer would know a lot about biology, and vice versa. These are completely different fields that have nothing to do with one another. Now, this young galaxy's problem isn't that much of a problem. It's only a problem in the sense that it means our models were wrong, mistaken about something, and have to be redone to account for these changes. That is, once more, how science works. When it is challenged, it doesn't just throw the whole thing out. It doesn't just throw away all the other evidence for something happening. It modifies itself. That's what it's intended to do. The Big Bang has enough evidence to say it actually occurred. The problem is that we don't understand every last aspect and detail of it. Thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope, we're getting a better idea of how it works, and that's a good thing.
And here's a quote from a secular astronomer. Now, this comes from an article. The headline reads, "Webb spots super old massive galaxies that shouldn't exist."
There's something to be said here about scientific journalism, which is very bad, not good at all. They'll take statements astronomers make and other scientists in any other field and make something sensational out of it. It's called clickbait. We do it here on YouTube all the time, so you should be pretty familiar with it. I guess those galaxies shouldn't exist by current models, but of course, current models are based on an understanding that may be incorrect. That doesn't mean the whole thing is incorrect. That just means this one aspect of, for example, galaxy formation is something that we don't have a good enough understanding of yet. It's not really that much of a problem. It's certainly not an existential crisis for science.
So this is what Erica Nelson said. She's an assistant professor of astrophysics at the University of Colorado Boulder. She says, it's bananas. Doug, it's bananas.
Bananas.
You just don't expect the early universe to be able to organize itself that quickly. These galaxies should not have had time to form.
But they did, and we need answers to those questions. And answers to those questions will be scientific, not, so Jesus did it after all.
Now, why isn't Professor Dave talking about all the discoveries of the James Webb and the Hubble telescope? We already knew some of this before. The James Webb just went on to confirm a lot of this stuff.
So a simple YouTube search of Professor Dave and James Webb Space Telescope would have given them exactly the video they're asking why he didn't make, because he did, in fact, make one. Go watch it. It's pretty cool.
David James must have never heard Bob Enyart's interview with Christian creationist Jim Burr, right? Recognized throughout the world for his achievements in actually designing and manufacturing telescopes. Christians aren't afraid of telescopes. We like telescopes just fine.
So this is a good example of taking a joke way too seriously. You didn't have to do that. Just for the record, you could have just taken it as a joke, like it was intended to be. He was poking fun at you, not making a serious argument.
Well, I have news for Professor Dave. See this book I'm holding right here, Doug? It's called Rare Earth, and it's co-authored by Dr. Donald Brownlee. He's a professor of astronomy at Washington University. He's the same Brownlee, Dr. Brownlee, that our very own Kevin Lee has interacted with regarding the overwhelming evidence that asteroids are floating rock piles that originated from Earth, from the global flood. The evidence continues to pile in.
Okay, we're going to ignore that completely delusional statement about space rocks and floods, and just focus in on the first thing he said, which is about the Rare Earth book. Now, Professor Dave was likely meaning to say that the Rare Earth book is being used completely out of context by creationists to argue their points. Remember, creationists don't have their own data, they just take it from other people, which is likely what happened here.
So the arguments of fine-tuning are being made from these two secular evolutionists. So these aren't creationist talking points, Professor Dave.
No, they weren't originally, but they are now because creationists keep stealing ideas from scientists and pretending like they made them themselves.
These two guys conclude that because of the fine-tuning, they quote, even simple animal life is most likely extremely rare in the entire universe. And again, it's because of all the fine-tuning things that we see in the universe that they document in this book.
An actual scientist is going to be using the term fine-tuning in a very different way than creationists are. Creationists use it to say there had to be a fine-tuner. That's not what scientists are saying. Scientists are merely musing over the fact that things are the way they are, how it got that way, and the fact that we're here to observe it all. It is quite mysterious. You don't solve that problem by saying, well, obviously that means God did it. That's not science. That's not scientific. If there is fine-tuning in the universe, even if a God was behind it, you'd still have to have some explanation for why and how that happened, and why those values are what they are, and why they work so well, and if any others would. These are questions, of course, creationists don't even begin to answer.
And then David James goes on to propose explanations, including the wacky, unprovable multiverse fantasy. But to his credit, he does at least admit that that's a fairly weak argument.
Notice that these guys are about to focus on the ideas of the universe existing, which Professor Dave himself mentioned were the weaker ones. They don't have anything at all to say about his stronger arguments, which are quite fascinating, actually, and they're doing their audience a real disservice with this intellectual dishonesty of only pointing to the least likely explanations for the universe existing.
He then muses that it could be intelligent life putting us in a simulation, and emphasizes, of course, that it's not a god or a deity or anything like that.
Even though I personally find the simulation hypothesis to be incredibly weak, almost laughable, to be honest, I must say that however unlikely it is, it's still more likely than there is some magic man in the sky who created everything.
So far, his debunking, the cupboard is bare, as far as I can tell so far, Fred.
There are essentially three different types of argument in this video. The first one is just attacks on Professor Dave and his character. The second one is they'll take some issue and pretend they're about to talk about it, and then not actually talk about it. The last one is this whole the cupboard is bare thing. It's bare because they're focusing deliberately on the weaker arguments. Arguments Professor Dave himself admits are the weaker arguments.
Fred, all of that scientific nomenclature, I just don't know what to do as a creationist. I wish I would have learned more of it so I could pretend I understand more of it.
Yeah.
Oh man, that extremely awkward pause after this guy makes a joke and the other guy doesn't know how to respond until he starts kind of like fake laughing a little bit. The cringe is perfect.
By the way, when did it become 13.787? Did that just happen in the last 0.787 minutes? I thought it was 13.452.
Yeah.
Now it's 13.787. Well, that's news to me.
I suspect there are a lot of things in science that would be news to you, but it's confusing why this would be in particular, because I've been involved in scientific communities online for about 25 years, and over that whole period, the age of the universe has been said to be about 13.7 billion years. So it's not really that big of a change, but these guys, of course, have to just ridicule it and make fun of it because they don't understand how science works and how these estimates are made in the first place.
But anyway, Professor Dave is about 5.725 years behind because NASA reported back in 2019 that the Hubble constant has been contradicted by findings, ironically, by the Hubble Telescope, which is pretty cool. I mean, you can't write that, right? You couldn't write that in a screenplay.
Yet another example of science changing to meet the realities of the universe and creationists not understanding why and saying it's bad. I will link the article down below so you yourself can have a look at it and see what scientists themselves say about this.
And Fred, we'll link to this article titled Mystery of the Universe's Expansion Rate Widens with New Hubble Data. The author bemuses that new theories may be needed to explain the forces that have shaped the cosmos there, David James.
The implication that they're making is that the Big Bang is going to have to be replaced with some other idea, some other hypothesis, some other theory. But no, that's not what the article is saying at all. And of course, I doubt they realize this, but I know their audience. If their audience even gets to the article, they won't understand what it's saying, so they won't even realize they are being misled about this article's implications.
Well, you know, there's this Nobel-winning astrophysicist. He now claims that the age of the universe is off by about a billion.
A billion?
Yeah, a billion. I wonder if he really means like 989,000,000.5672593. You're off by that much.
Yet again, as happens repeatedly throughout this video, they seem to be assuming that science works by the dictates of whoever's got the most qualifications. But that's not how that works. One random Nobel Prize winner saying the universe may be a billion years older than we think it is does not make it so. It's not going to move the needle very much without some solid research. Now, it may be the case that the universe is a billion years older than we think it is, but that would, again, not really be much of a problem. That's just the scientific process. We change as the data changes. Science is a process, and the process is ongoing and never-ending, and I'm having to say all of this stuff over and over again because these guys are misrepresenting how science works in new and exciting ways every few minutes.
He talks about creationists trying to learn the vernacular so we can pretend. But he's just regurgitating vernacular that he's imbibed, and he's really pretending.
Are these guys expecting Professor Dave to take ayahuasca in the desert and go on a vision quest to figure out everything in science himself? The problem is that you don't understand science while regurgitating the terminology and data of science. That's the problem. You don't understand it.
And you can buy our fantastic video on evidences against the Big Bang. It's in my top 2 of all the videos that we provide through our store.
Well, there you have it, folks. He said the magic word, evidences. So that means we have to now believe every single thing he's saying. It's required by law.
Then there is the ratio of hydrogen to helium in the universe, which is about 3-to-1. That there is so much helium indicates that the universe was once hot enough to fuse protons and neutrons, which is explained by the nucleosynthesis aspect of the Big Bang model. No other model can account for this observation in general, and they certainly cannot account for this precise ratio that is specifically predicted by the duration of the nucleosynthesis epoch as demanded by the model.
We'll find later in the video that David James claims that we cherry-picked the data, and that's it's a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black.
Can you guess what they're about to do here in a second? Go on, guess. I'll give you a couple seconds to just go ahead and guess what they're about to do.
A paper in Nature magazine describes the particulars of this prediction as, quote, assumed ad hoc to obtain the required or predicted abundances.
In that clip, they're talking about the ratio of hydrogen to helium in the universe, which, by the way, is an observed reality. But they do it with a quote they pulled from somewhere that begins with ... Now, call me old-fashioned, but when I see a quote somebody's pulling beginning with ... I assume they're leaving something out. And it turns out they are. How do I know this? Because I looked the paper up myself. The paper's called The Extragalactic Universe, An Alternative View. It came out in 1990, the year I was born, which wouldn't matter that much except for the fact that science has changed so much since then. There's so much more that has been discovered about our universe in 34 years that it's very odd to pull this one quote from a paper endorsing either a steady-state universe or an alternative model for the Big Bang. But let's check out the full quote and see what these guys left out. But a particular value for the baryon-to-photon ratio needs to be assumed ad hoc to obtain the required abundances. Now, the paper was talking about the balance of elements in the universe, but clearly was not saying anything specific about the ratio of hydrogen to helium, which is, once more, observed.
And then there's a thing in physics essays that quote, the study of historical data shows that over the years, predictions of the ratio of helium to hydrogen in a Big Bang universe have been repeatedly adjusted to agree with the latest available estimates of that ratio as observed in the real universe.
Notice that they once more pull a quote and don't tell us anything else about the article, what conclusions it draws, nothing. They just pull a quote out of somewhere and say, ha, look, we're proven correct. But that's really all we get from them. They pull this out and they just act like, well, sorry, scientists, that's it. I didn't look this article up. I didn't think it was worth the effort. With the last one, I had to look through 6 pages of a very boring research paper just to find the one quote that they felt like they should include about half of. So this time, I just figured, hey, well, forget about it. It's not worth the effort. But if anybody else wants to look it up and tell us in the comments what it actually says and what its conclusions are, that'd be really cool.
So again, David James, these are not creationist talking points. So are you debunking your own people on your own side? I don't think so.
Cherry picking a random quote about an article you don't even tell us the conclusions of is not exactly the same thing as proving your case. In fact, you are doing exactly what he was claiming you were doing, and you don't even seem to notice. You deny cherry picking, and then you blatantly, openly do just that.
Weren't we just talking about the ratio of helium to hydrogen, right? And David James says no other model can explain ... How can you say that? How can you say that no other model can explain as if you've reviewed every model and every possible model that could... That's the kind of hyperbole that you warned people about in the beginning.
The Big Bang model works for our universe. It works phenomenally well. Every time we discover something new, we can integrate it into the model without much of a problem. That makes it a very good model. So what he's essentially saying here is that no model synthesizes all of the information we have about the universe and makes it work so well. I think that's a pretty easy claim to make, because what other models are there that are taken seriously and have the same amount of data backing them? None.
Finally, there is the cosmic microwave background radiation, something which was specifically predicted by Big Bang cosmology and then subsequently observed. This is a perfect black body spectrum permeating the cosmos, which is a remnant of the recombination epoch, when electrons first coupled with atomic nuclei and relaxed to the ground state, emitting photons and causing the universe to become transparent for the first time. This occurred 380,000 years after the initial singularity, and since has been stretched out by the expansion of the universe to measure 2.7 Kelvin with extreme isotropy, meaning the same in every direction.
First of all, the CMB prediction is an example of historical revisionism. But you know what, Fred? We could give that one to him, right? We could give that one to the Big Bang evolutionist side that David James represents.
If you do that, you have lost the argument, because the CMB alone is enough to prove the Big Bang really happened. That's all it takes. To give up that one point is to give up the whole game. And I don't think they realize that, because if they did, they probably wouldn't be giving it up.
And we can talk about the scores of predictions the Big Bang has failed on. Okay, just to name a few, Fred. An entire universe of missing antimatter. Where's that, David James? And then homogeneity and isotropy. The contradictions to the Big Bang's foundational predictions of homogeneity and isotropy.
Would you be surprised to find out that there's reasonable explanations for every single one of these things, and none of them involve God doing it?
At the end of the clip, he said that the CMB shows extreme isotropy.
Yeah.
So extreme, Doug. So he's wrong yet again. David James, you're wrong again. And that's because of what secular astronomers have coined, and you mentioned it here recently, Doug. You said the axis of evil. They call it evil because it totally upends their entire Big Bang cosmology model.
There is a question of whether the axis of evil is really a problem to begin with. Now, some studies have shown that there is no axis of evil in the first place, but if there is, it's merely something that needs to be explained with better hypotheses. It's not something that just kills the Big Bang idea off immediately. That's, again, not how science works.
But Planck revealed that one half of the universe has bigger CMB variations than the other. And that variation, Doug, extends right through the Earth's axis. So imagine a globe cut in two of the universe, and right through the center it happens to sit Earth's axis, where these differences in temperature occur.
This to me implies there's some kind of observer effect happening here, where you're looking at the universe from a certain position, and that by default has some impact on what exactly you're seeing. Other people have made note of this same thing, and I don't think it's fair to say that this proves there's no isotropy in the universe. Even with the axis of evil, there's still a high degree of isotropy in the universe, certainly enough to validate the Big Bang as something that actually happened. It's just that there are potential complications. There are potential things that could have to be changed as the data itself changes.
To this issue of the axis of evil, what's funny is a report that happened before Planck, because they were hoping that it would rescue them and show that it was just noise in the data.
And around we go to another terrible headline in science journalism, which then they repeat as if it's the gospel, God's honest truth. But in fact, it's not. And also, this is from 2009, so a lot has happened since 2009. I would like to see them quote something much more recent, because there have been arguments over this very recently that are pretty interesting, but of course, they don't really know anything about this topic, they don't really know what it means, they don't really know what they're talking about, so I doubt they will.
Quote, the fact that Planck has made such a significant detection of these anomalies erases any doubts about their reality. It can no longer be said they are artifacts of the measurements. They are real, and we have to look for a credible explanation. Who's the we? It's not young Earth creationists. It's Paolo Natoli of the European Space Agency back in 2013.
So there we have it. Once more, the Big Bang has been completely destroyed by the opinion of one person and not the scientific community, which studies this stuff constantly. Like, the scientific community, I don't know if you know this, still exists. We're almost in 2025, which is 12 years after that statement was made. There have been discussions on these issues, there have been debates on these issues, and surprise, surprise, we have yet to find a resolution for whether the axis of evil really even exists or not. It was said to be unequivocal in that quote, but that doesn't necessarily make it so. That means it seems like it's so. But of course, nuance is all but lost on these types of people. So there we have it, another very long video about how creationists don't know what they're talking about, aren't qualified to talk about it in the first place, and just make bad arguments all the time, and if they can't do that, they just make straw man arguments all the time. So thanks for coming, thanks for being here. I hope you're not nearly as frustrated as I am with these kinds of people, and I hope I've done a pretty decent job at telling you exactly why these people are wrong.